Okay, right, lovely. Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just a little introduction to myself. So I'm Georgina. I'm the project manager on this scheme. And this morning, sorry, I'm moving things around. So yeah, so this morning we'll be sharing some information with you about the Fit for Net Zero programme, which is currently operating within the Wiltshire Council area. We'll look at the support on offer, what types of measures that you can consider. We'll also go through a variety of case studies of businesses that we've already supported in the area. And we'll also have a brief overview of how the grants process works. So delivering the presentation today will be myself and my colleague Neil Towler, who is our senior energy specialist, and he's been with 7Y for 15 years. So he's got a lot of experience and has helped many of the businesses that we work with. You may have already met him if you've already had a survey. If you've just joined, please remember to keep your speaker on mute throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, please add them to the chat and there'll be an opportunity to pick these up later on. Okay, so I think we can begin. I'll just get the presentation back to the beginning. Or have you lost that now? You have, haven't you? Just go. Right, here we go.
Thanks, Georgina. People hear me okay? I presume so, unless someone
else. Yes, I can hear you and we can see the slides as well.
Great. Good start. Thanks, Georgina, for reminding me how long I've been at 7Y. It sounds like a long time, 15 years. A lot has changed in the sustainability sort of agenda world over that time. Maybe not enough. That's probably a different conversation. Okay, I'll just explain a little bit as to what we're going to cover today. I'll just say a few words about 7Y, who we are, what we do, if you're not familiar with our organisation. And then I'm going to pass back to Georgina for a couple of minutes just to go over the Fit for Net Zero programme, a little bit more on the specifics on how it works, how you apply that type of thing. I'm going to spend some time then looking at why you might want to consider energy efficiency if it's not already obvious, as well as looking at some of the improvement measures that you might want to consider as well. And then we'll introduce some case studies. So these are organisations, businesses that we've worked with in the past on a previous scheme in Wiltshire that have made improvements. So that might give you some additional ideas of perhaps what you might be able to or might be able to do. And then we pass back to Georgina again, who will explain the application and funding application process. So you're familiar, hopefully, with that aspect. And then, if all goes to plan, we'll have a bit of time at the end for some questions and answers, and we can go over any bits that you might want to double check on. Now, as Georgina said, we've had a bit of a issue with the screen sharing. For some reason I can't screen share. We haven't worked it out in the time we've had. So Georgina will be controlling what I can see. So I'll be probably prompting her to change the slides every now and again, or to hit the enter button or whatever. But yeah, okay, so that's the agenda. So if you want, we can move on to the next one. So yeah, as if you're not familiar with 7Y, some of you may, maybe some of you won't. We're a non-profit company, registered sustainability charity. I'm looking essentially at those four main areas of work below. You can see in the boxes there. So fuel poverty alleviation, which is what the organisation was initially set up to do. Decarbonisation of buildings, carbon capture, which is something relatively new we're looking at, but also working with rural communities, typically across Wales as well. So we typically work within those four main areas, I suppose. You move on. Maybe I hold up my phone with a pen. I don't see one. Where we work, so we work across Wales and the English border counties, so Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, South Gloss, Wiltshire, obviously. We do stray into some of the other counties, neighbouring counties as well, so Worcestershire, for example, maybe occasionally into Bristol, that kind of it, but typically that sort of southwestish type area. We've got a head office in Gloucester Quays. If you're familiar with Gloucester, it's one of those old warehouse type buildings in the Quays, and we also have an office in something called the Hive at Clendrindod, Wales. I have to make sure I say that properly, but yeah, Clendrindod, Wales, which is central Wales. We got an office there as well. And yeah, but about a little bit more details to what we do, the support services that we offer. So fuel poverty is, as I said, one of the things we were initially set up to do, because the company actually started, we just celebrated 25 years in the last couple of weeks, actually, I think it was. So for 25 years, I haven't been there for 25 years, only 15 of those. Fuel poverty is what the organisation was set up to look at alleviating initially. So we run things like home energy advice lines for householders in the counties that we work, energy advocate services that typically working with households that are perhaps in fuel debt, living coal damp homes, working alongside their energy suppliers to try and work out how we can help them reduce their fuel debt, that kind of thing. We run community development programs. As I mentioned, they're typically more over in Wales. We run grant funded schemes, so hence this Wiltshire scheme, which is for obviously commercial buildings, but a lot of the funded schemes that we run are for domestic buildings, domestic properties, householders, landlords, owned properties, domestic properties. So channeling funding, so there could be national funding for things like eco schemes, for example, or local funding schemes. And also, as I said, on the business side, we run other business funding schemes in recent years as well. And then as part of that, we can also then, or as well as that, we can also offer other technical expertise. So we do specialist energy surveys. A lot of the work I do mainly is doing energy surveys for either households or for businesses. So doing assessment audits, carbon footprinting, feasibility studies for renewables, that type of thing as well. And as I mentioned earlier, a relatively recent thing we've been looking at is carbon capture and sequestration technologies, specifically biochar, and that's we're looking at that at a centre up in Warrington in the north of England at the moment, which is quite an exciting thing at the moment as well. So that's the kind of things that we do. So yeah, pass it back to Georgina, who just will go over a bit more about the Fit for Net Zero scheme.
Yes, so thank you, Neil. So Fit for Net Zero. So this is the scheme that we're currently operating in Wiltshire. It's funded by Wiltshire Council and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It's part of a wider programme titled Fit for Future. You may find that your businesses may be eligible for some other grants in there as well. So it's worth having a look at. But for us, what we're offering are free energy efficiency surveys and reports, and there's also the opportunity to apply for funding. So there's a max grant available of £30,000 for up to 50% of the total measures, and there's sort of the minimum is around 5,000 for a minimum of 25% of the measures. Also to note, the programme is running until March 2025. However, funding is limited. So if you are keen to look at grant funding, we recommend getting those in before the end of this year, if possible. Okay. But part of the benefits of working with us is that you'll get a survey. So if you just want to gain a better understanding of your own business, where it currently stands, and then have some ideas maybe of where to take things in future. You could just have the survey and you'll receive a report which will provide you with lots of recommendations that will be suitable for your business, letting you know about sort of how much you could save or how much in cost and carbon. And then, as we said, we can support with grant funding. It's available for up to £30,000, but we'll go into that a little bit later, the process of actually applying to that. But the benefit of working with 7Y is that our energy specialists are available to support you throughout. We'll be able to answer your questions, signpost you to relevant installers, or help you understand and digest the information in your quotes where they may not be the most easy to understand. We also maintain a relationship with the council, again, supporting through that grant application process. So you're not on your own through that. Okay. So Neil will go through a little bit more about what to expect from the surveys.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you sign up for the scheme, one of the first things we do, obviously, we'll get in touch and try and arrange a site survey with you to come out to your property. But perhaps prior to that, or perhaps on the day that we do arrive, we will be looking at things like your energy use, your current energy use, essentially. So we need to know, ideally, how much energy you currently use. So we'd be looking to get energy bills, ideally from the last 12 months or so, for each fuel that you use on site. And that then allows us to understand, obviously, how much you're currently spending and how much you're using, but then we can benchmark where you are currently, so we can understand what your current carbon emissions and what your current costs are. And that then allows us to better understand what the savings might be from making improvements, which will then allow you to better understand if the improvements that you're looking at investing in will make financial sense, or if carbon's a big driver, carbon reduction sense. So yeah, so review your energy use, and that's a big part of it. But then obviously we will come out and we spend a couple of hours at your site. So we'd typically have a chat first about the building and how you use it, what you do, what you use energy for, what your plans and motivations are, that type of thing. And then once we've got that sort of, essentially that picture, that understanding what your organisation is and what your plans are, we'll then spend some time looking around the building as well. So we'll have a look at the fabric of your building, the walls, the roofs, the floors, etc., to see if there are options in improving the insulation, for example. We'll look at your current space and water heating systems, so what you're currently using for that, to see if there are options to improve on that. Any other areas of energy consumption that you might have. So if you're a manufacturing organisation, that could be process manufacturing. It could be cooling. If you're a pub or something, you might be having cooling services in a bar, in a beer cellar, sorry. It could be catering services. Basically, wherever you're using energy, we'll see if we can work out are there opportunities there to reduce that energy use. And then once we've looked at all of that, we'd also try and understand what the options are in regards to renewable energy systems as well. So typically that will be solar, but we can look at things like heat pumps as well, obviously, for heating, but it could be some other things as well, but probably solar. So once we've got all of that, we can then create a nice report for you, trying to detail exactly what the options are. As I said, what the carbon and cost savings might be from making those improvements. And we'll give you some low cost and capital cost improvement options within that report. And that, as I said, will give you an understanding of your current carbon emissions, what they could be if you were to do this, that, or the other, or everything that we recommend. Potentially what the cost savings will be, but also potentially what the cost of investments might be, roughly. And potentially what order to do that work in, assuming you can't do everything at one time, what the best options might be to do which technology first, or whatever that might be. So that's kind of what to expect. So yeah, you can move on from that one, Georgina. Yeah, so this one comes up one at a time, so you can bring that one at a time, Georgina, if that's all right. Yeah, so why consider energy efficiency? It might be you might think it's an obvious question with one single obvious answer, which is save money on your energy costs, and that is typically primarily the main driver. We all know energy costs obviously gone up quite a lot over the last couple of years. They have started to come down a bit, but they won't go back to what they were before. So, essentially by making energy saving improvements, a range of them which we can go into later, you will be saving money on your energy costs essentially. Now, next one, number 2. You'll be future-proofing your building against continued energy cost increases. So, we still have occasionally a number of companies that signed quite long energy supply contracts, which have sort of pre-pandemic energy cost unit costs to them. If you're renegotiating energy cost contracts, those are coming to an end. The cost essentially is always going to be going up. So by making improvements, you're going to be mitigating some of those increases over the years to come. 3, improving the comfort of the building. So if you're insulating walls, draft proofing, windows and doors that are drafty, perhaps improving the heating system. Hopefully, you'll be improving comfort for your staff, keeping them warmer in the winter, perhaps cooler in the summer as well. You could be adding electric vehicle charging points, perhaps to the building, allowing perhaps staff or even clients or visitors to charge their vehicles, perhaps even from a solar array that you might have installed or be installing as well. So could be improving your building ideally as well. So there are other funding incentive schemes. Hit enter again, actually, Georgina. They'll bring up a couple more. So there are other funding schemes that you could take advantage of at the moment as well. And this could change in the future. So the Smart Export Guarantee, if you're not familiar with that, very briefly, it provides a payment for any solar electricity that you feed back to the grid. So you can get a small income from that. There's a boiler upgrade scheme. So if you're replacing a fossil fuel heating system like a gas boiler, replacing it with a heat pump, air source or ground source heat pump, you can get £7,500 towards the cost. That's something that's available for domestic, but it is also available for relatively smallish commercial organisations as well. Heat pumps up to a certain size can get that funding as well. Workplace charging scheme is you can get funding for electric vehicle charging points. I think it's £350 for each charging point you put in. So there are other funding schemes out there as well, or incentives that you might be benefiting from or could benefit from. Number 5, being an exemplar. As you probably will know, people are increasingly interested or wanting to know what organisations are doing and that they're doing their bit around the climate emergency. So if you can demonstrate to your clients that you have an action plan in place, you've had an energy survey, you're actively looking at making improvements to reduce your energy use, you're perhaps more likely to hold on to customers or make new customers who are aware of these kind of issues. Number 6, so compliance. So you might be working towards various quality management accreditations, ISO accreditations. B Corp is one I see quite regularly. So organisations are quite keen to promote the fact that they're now B Corp accredited. That could be one thing. Equally, if you're a landlord or if you're in a rented leased building, you may be familiar with EPCs, energy performance certificates, and something called the minimum energy efficiency standards, or MEES for short. So essentially, if you have an F or G rated building, EPC rated building, in theory at least, you can't actually lease that building anymore until you make improvements to improve the rating to an E or D or C, etc. And those regulations, those standards are being ramped up over the next 5 to 6 years. I think they're aiming for C currently by 2030, I think it is. So you'll be making improvements, perhaps funded improvements. You'll be more likely to improve your building's rating and complying with those MEES standards if you are renting. 7. It's again perhaps an obvious one really, but you'll be doing your bit basically to contribute towards local and national carbon reduction targets. Wiltshire Council have said a climate emergency. Obviously, we've got national targets around carbon zero. You can do your bit as well, basically. You might think of other things as well there. There's probably other reasons to consider energy efficiency, but those are the ones I kind of thought of relatively easily. So I was just going to go over briefly the different types of things that you could potentially be doing under this scheme to improve your building, and potentially those things that you could be applying for funding for. So insulation and building fabric. So we typically start with the fabric of the building first. If you can reduce the energy demand of the building from heating, then it kind of leads on to everything else. So there are different things you could be doing with the insulation, the building fabric. Wall insulation is obvious one, but cavity wall insulation. So if you've got a building that's built from roughly the 1920s to the 1980s, you might have cavity walls. Chances are, then, if there is between those periods, they might be cavity insulated. So that's a relatively low cost and quick and easy thing to do. If you've got older solid brick, solid stone walls, or sort of an old warehousey type building, it does get a bit more complicated. You can do external insulation, internal insulation. It's more expensive, more complicated, but possibly, perhaps with this funding, it might make that difference in making that viable. Loft roof insulation. Now, if you've got a typical loft, as you do in a house where you can lay insulation between the joists, we'd be checking that to see if you could top that up to reduce your energy demand. If you've got a loft a bit more like that one of that picture, then it gets more complicated. Again, you might have to take the plasterboard down, insulate between the rafters there. But again, we can look at those options with you. Flat roofs, you can insulate those. Ideally, if you're perhaps refelting or repairing them. Floors can be insulated. Again, can be tricky, expensive to dig up floors. But if you've got cellars, perhaps beneath your floor, that can make it easier. We can look at that option. Glazing. The obvious one there is if you're improving single glazing to modern double glazing or triple glazing. But equally, it could be adding things like solar film or blinds, for example. So if you've got big glazed areas in your building, which are susceptible to areas overheating in the summer or getting cold in the winter, we can look at things like solar film, which will help to reflect back heat in the summer but keep heat in the winter. Equally, blinds work similar way. Doors, again, draft proofing doors, but also replacing doors with insulated doors. So that's not just your standard personnel type door, but shutter doors, big shutter doors in your businesses. Big areas, obviously, you can get insulated shutter doors, so that might make the difference in keeping an area warmer, more comfortable, and reducing heat demand. Improving the fabric of cooled areas. So I'm thinking here things like beer cellars, for example, which have a cellar cooler to keep them cold. If you can insulate them better, you reduce demand on the cellar cooler. So there's lots of things you can do around insulation and building fabric. We'll be looking at all of those with you. Space and water heating and cooling. That's kind of typically the next thing that we look at. So we'll be looking at what you've got there currently. And if you've got a boiler that's gas boiler that's only a couple of years old and it's working fine, chances are we'd probably think that you could probably leave that there. But you can hit the enter actually, Georgina. And again, yeah, but if you've got perhaps an old gas boiler, an old oil boiler, for example, then we'd be thinking about what you could do to replace that. And that could be putting in a more efficient gas boiler or more efficient LPG oil boiler, and that will translate to some savings. There might be a 20% efficiency improvement on that boiler, for example. But equally, we'd also be looking at alternative options for you as well. So if you hit enter, Georgina, heat pumps would probably be the obvious alternative for you to look at potentially. So I'm not going to go into the details of how heat pumps work at the moment, but essentially they can bring in free energy from the air or from the ground, and it can then feed into an existing radiator or underfloor heating system. So they're more efficient than a gas boiler. It might be 300 to 400% efficient, so you're getting free energy from the air, which can make it cheaper to run, particularly if you've got solar as well, which can help to mitigate the extra electricity that you're going to be using. Got air or ground to water, as I said, which feeds into radiators or underfloor heating. Air to air, I've just put in there as well. Essentially, that's air conditioning. So if you currently have radiators, etc., and you don't want to add in that kind of thing, which is obviously quite costly to put in radiators. If you don't have them already, then air to air, essentially blowing warm air or cold air in the summer, could be an option as well. I've just mentioned electric heating there as an option as well. If electric heating can work well in some standard electric heating can work well in some cases. Panel heaters in toilets and bathrooms, places where you don't need much heating, they're time and thermostatically controlled, that can work okay. If you've got a big warehouse type building, or workshop areas, in some cases it doesn't make sense to try and heat up the big volume of air in that particular area. You just might need to heat a couple of people at a workstation in a corner of the building or something. So therefore, it might make more sense to look at things like radiant, or infrared heating, which just heats the person or the object, as opposed to trying to heat up that big volume of air. So there are different options for different properties and different buildings. But yes, and to consider what other future improvement works considering. So as I mentioned, if you're thinking about things like solar PV, and you're considering moving from gas boilers to LPG boilers, etc., to heat pumps, a solar PV array could help to mitigate that additional electricity requirement, particularly in the spring and the autumn, those sort of shoulder periods. Not so much in the winter, obviously, because you're not going to get so much new solar in the winter. They can help to mitigate that additional demand. Possibly if you've got battery storage there as well, maybe if the building isn't used over the weekend, you could then store up some energy in the batteries to help with the additional electricity demand over the week. So there are other factors to consider when you're looking at your heating as well. You go on, carry on. And just to emphasise, if you're serious about moving to zero carbon or going as low carbon as possible, you're going to have to move away from fossil fuels. Almost certainly will have to move away from fossil fuels. So you're going to have to ditch gas or oil, essentially. And typically that would probably be from a heat pump, but it could be, as I said, some of the other things we looked at as well. Yeah, okay. Oh, and just to other funding incentives as well. So just to bear in mind, so things like the boiler upgrade scheme as well, which could be available, which could make that difference to a heat pump making financial sense for you. So space and water heating controls as well. That's something else. We will be looking at the existing controls to see what they currently allow you to do. Now, if you're replacing a heating system with a completely new one, chances are the installer will specify up-to-date heating controls for you, and that will kind of cover that aspect. If you're keeping your existing heating, then we will be looking at whether those heating controls give you the control that you need to ensure that you're not doing things like heating areas that don't need to be heated, or the heating's coming on when it's not needed, that type of thing. So we'll be looking at optimizing that as much as possible. As a minimum, we'd be looking, if you have a radiator system, we'd be looking at things like programmers and thermostatic radiator valves and room thermostats. But moving on from that, you'd be looking at things like zone control, so making sure you're heating different areas of the building to different times and temperatures based on what's needed. So, for example, if you've got a building which has offices in, but also workshop areas, you need to be heating the offices to different times and temperatures, probably to the workshop areas. So the workshop areas need to be heated probably to a lower temperature. So we'll be looking at optimizing the controls, or what control optimization there might be available. Remote controls can be very handy at places like community centres, for example. So someone can control the heating from their home as opposed to going into the community centre to turn on the heating ready for the next people who have been using that particular room. So it just gives you a bit more flexibility. And around hot water, we're just looking to see how much you actually need, because quite commonly people heat up big cylinders of hot water and they're only perhaps washing the hand, doing a bit of hand washing and dishwashing. It might make more sense to move to electric point of use heaters, multi-point heaters, but ideally we're looking to make sure that water is only heated to the time and to the correct temperature that you need it for. Okay. And I just want to introduce a few other options. So this is not an exhaustive list. There'll be plenty of other things that you could be thinking about as well, but I just want to put in a few examples. So these are things that potentially could be grant funded as well, but we'll be looking at. So LED lighting is an obvious one. It's one that's probably most popular improvement measure under our previous business funded scheme. Changing old fluorescent incandescent lighting to LED can make quite big savings, particularly if you've got lots of lights, and it's a relatively low cost as well. Adding lighting sensors, things like motion sensors, daylight dimming, daylight controls to make sure lights only actually come on when they're needed. Ventilation, so improving the ventilation potentially. So you've got things like ventilation with heat recovery, which might be relevant. Extraction, if you've got kitchens, you'll have an extract system from the kitchen probably. So making sure you've got things like variable speed control for your extraction, or making sure that extraction is modern and efficient. Destratification fans, that's the picture on the top right there. So that helps to move warm air that's moved to the top of a building, top of a room, back down to where it's needed, reducing heating demand. Ambient cooling, so that's the top left picture up there. That's using in cellars, in beer cellars, typically that drags in cold air from the outside when it's cold enough outside already, reducing demand on your cellar coolers. Pumps and motors, so variable speed drives and inverters. So that's just making sure that things like pumps and motors are only running at the times they need to, and for the speeds that they need to. Quite commonly, pumps and motors, old ones, will just run consistently at the same speed. Compressed air, a common one in things like garages. So perhaps updating a compressed air system, making sure there's no leaks, or improving and fixing leaks. Heating control improvements, deaerators, bottom left picture there. System additives, weather compensation to make sure the boiler only comes on, it modulates based on what the weather outside is actually like. Placing gas hobs with induction hobs, more efficient tap showers, urinal controls, timers on drinks, fridges. I mean, we could go on and on. Pipework insulation, better fridges, more efficient fridges and freezers. So yeah, it's not, as I said, not an exhaustive list, but just a few additional ideas there of other things that you could be considering as well under this scheme. And then briefly, renewables. So once we look at everything else, then typically we look at renewables after that. So heat pumps, as I mentioned before, I just put in their plan for prior to the heating system being replaced. So what I'm just trying to say there is, ideally we don't wait until your gas boiler goes pop in sort of November and then think about heat pump. You need to be planning this in ideally. If your boiler is getting old, you might want to think about it before that happens, ideally, because it'll take a bit longer to put a heat pump in potentially. But solar is going to be probably the main renewable otherwise that we can be looking at. So it could be solar thermal. So that's heating hot water only. Probably only going to be relevant if you do use a lot of hot water currently. So maybe showers, perhaps if you've got a lot of showers, especially if you're a cricket club or something. But solar PV is more adaptable, I suppose, and flexible. I'll put in their size with current or future demand. Well, that means essentially you just need to bear in mind that your current demand for electricity might be different in the future, particularly if you do move things like heat pumps. If you do start to think about putting electric vehicle charging points in for your staff or visitors, you might want to consider the fact that a bigger solar PV array is probably going to be more cost effective or future proof the building. And because you can also consider things like battery storage as well. So if you're generating a lot more electricity currently than you're actually using on site, you could put that extra electricity into batteries. But in the future, there might be an opportunity to use more of that electricity as opposed to feeding it back to the grid and getting paid a little bit under the smart export guarantee. So just to say, if you do put a smaller array in, make sure you install it with future expansion in mind, because chances are your electricity demand will be increasing in years to come. So it can be a really good thing to do. Just a few words around our previous scheme that we run. It's called Target 2030, which ran, go to the next slide, I think, Georgina. From 2020 to 2023, but it's run in Swindon and Wiltshire as well, also ran in Gloucestershire, and it essentially provided the same thing that this scheme provided. So it provides an energy survey, energy bill analysis, report recommendations, and we provided 30% funding for improvement works under that scheme. And we supported on that scheme 128 businesses. The grants, about £470,000 worth of grants were awarded on that scheme, with a total investment from the organisations involved about just over £1.5 million, and it saved about over 950 tonnes of carbon annually over its lifespan as well. That was an EU funded scheme, hence why it's closed. So these case studies were just to sort of give you again a bit of an idea as to what other organisations have done, and there may be organisations in here that are similar to yourselves perhaps, but it might give a few more ideas as well. So these were companies that did work made improvements under the Target 2030 scheme. So Red FM, based in Royal Wootton Bassett. Essentially, they have sort of office space which they lease to other organisations. They were interested in energy efficiency as part of a refurb, essentially. But they, as you can see from the picture, I'm not sure that's the actual LEDs, but they replaced old fluorescent lighting with LEDs. They had an old gas boiler, I think. They replaced the old gas boiler with a more efficient gas boiler, and as part of that process, as I was explaining earlier, they improved the heating controls as well. So they introduced a zoning system for the building, which allows them to heat different areas to different times and temperatures based on what the occupants actually require. And they received about £1,800 in grant funding for that. And total cost was about getting on for £6,000. And as part of that, they save about £700 a year and around about 3 tonnes of carbon annually as well. So there's the Moulton Group. So this is one I went to actually. It's just to highlight actually they build small-wheeled bicycles. That photo actually isn't one of their bikes, in case you're wondering. Just in case they're watching this, it's not their bike, but they build small-wheel bikes. Interestingly, they export most of them to Japan and places like South Korea. But they were based in just outside Bradford-on-Avon, an old 1960s building they'd relatively recently moved into, and lots of old fluorescent lighting in the building. So we spent some time counting all the lights, working out how long each of those lights were going to be on typically during the working day. And then from that, we were able to work out, how much they would save by replacing all of those with LEDs, or the majority of those with LEDs in the areas that are primarily used. And you can see the savings there. Lifetime savings are more than £72,000. They received getting off £2,000 towards the cost of about getting on for £6,500. Annual savings of quite a significant amount of money. That £2,900 replacing all the lighting. It's definitely a job worth doing. It's relatively the payback on that is sort of 3 years or so, or less than that with the funding. So that was a quick and easy easy thing for them to do. Okay. Royal Wootton Bassett Rugby Football Club. Home of the Wiltshire All Blacks, Bassett Ravens. Yes, they had quite a modern building already, so fabric improvements weren't really required. But they did have a roof that was nicely ready for solar PV. So that was quite an obvious one to get a solar PV array installed. So they went for a 46 kilowatt peak array. It filled up the roof pretty well. And over the lifetime of that solar array, it would save them over £200,000, nearly £230,000. They received about over £11,000 worth of funding, and based on their energy costs, they were saving about £10,000 a year, which is quite a significant amount of money. So they must be using quite a lot of electricity at that site. Be saving that amount, but yeah, it's a decent amount, and saving about 20 tons of carbon annually as well. So that's quite a big figure. Bratton Jubilee Hall. Again, this is one I went to. This is just outside of Westbury. Quite an old building. As I said, they're built in 1887, but they did have some extensions towards the back of the building, more modern extensions at the back of the building as well. So we made quite a range of recommendations here. So there was some insulation improvements. They were going to be looking at things like loft and possibly cavity wall insulation at the modern extension at the back. They had a bit of a mix of heating systems, which they're sort of trying to work out as well. But they're provided some funding for them for LED lighting with some sensors, destratification fans. So I showed you that earlier to help move the warm air around the building better. And they received about £1,100 towards the cost of doing that. And interestingly, they're now looking to apply for funding under this scheme for a solar PV array going at the back of that building. So they're kind of moving on to those kind of next steps now as well. Yeah, and that's so I'll pass it back to Georgina briefly, who will just go over the grant process with you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we've kind of got a really good idea of what's possible now. So I suppose now it's about thinking about how can this apply to yourselves. And I've been trying to work out how can I make this as easy as possible. So I've kind of like broken it down into 3 steps. So the grant process. So first of all, you'd need to sign up to the scheme, and you do this by submitting your interest via our website. After that, once you're all signed up, you'd hear from one of our energy assessors who are booking a survey. And once you've had a survey, you'll receive one of our bespoke reports, which will provide you recommendations. And alongside that, you'll also receive a grant application pack, which should be for you to complete if you decide to go ahead with a grant. So you could just stop there. You could just stop at step 1. But if you'd like to go through with a grant, you then need to use the application pack and fill in all the measures that you'd like installed, who will be installing it, and we'd also request quotes from at least 2 suppliers for the measures, each measure. You'd then return this back to us. We would go through your application, do all the calculations, etc. needed, and we'd submit it on your behalf to the council, who will then make the final decision on whether the grant is approved or not. So the council, if the application is successful, you'd then receive a grant agreement from the council. Although I would note that no works can be installed on the measures until you have received the grant agreement, and that has all been signed and returned to the council. So that's just one thing to bear in mind, that you first need to have the approval before you go ahead with having any measures installed. So how do you then receive the funds? So once all the measures have been installed, you can then make your claim for the funds that had already been agreed for you. So the council will provide you with a claim form, which you can then fill out after the measures have been installed. you'll return this to the council. You'll need to provide some evidence. So they'll ask for photos and invoices, confirmation of the payment. And then once that's all gone through, it takes roughly 4 weeks for that to be processed. But after that time, it should be sent to you and you'll continue saving, hopefully, on costs and carbon. So there's a few steps involved, but we're here to support you throughout so that you're not on your own on that. But yeah, if you have any questions on that, feel free to pop them in the chat and we can go back through that. Oh, we're at the questions bit. Okay, brilliant. Well, let's come on. Oh, I need to leave, but thank you. Okay, no problem, Paul. So yes, if anyone has any questions they would like one of us to answer, please feel free. If you don't have any questions right this second, but some thoughts come to you in the coming days, you can drop us an email directly. I'll put our contact details on the screen at the end. Oh, here we go. How long approximately will it take from submitting a grant form to receiving payment post installation? Submitting it, so it would depend on what you're having installed. So if it's something like changing light bulbs, that may be a case of you've submitted your grant application, that's been assessed, you've received the agreement, you may then just need to go purchase those light bulbs and then install them yourselves, which could be a matter of days. Once you've done that, you can then submit your claim form. Roughly from there, it's about 4 weeks to then receive the payment. But if you're doing something like a solar array, that could be like a couple months. Neil, in your experience, how long does it take for something like a bigger measure to be installed?
Yeah, so depends if you're in an area, if you need to get permissions, for example, if you're in a conservation area or the building's listed or something, that could add in time. There's things like something called a district network operator as well, so the DNOs to give permission. If you've got a particularly large array, you might need to get permission from the DNO as well, which can add in time. So yeah, it can depend, but it could be a month or two to get that, from the quote stage to actual install. Possibly it depends on the installer as well, what their booking is like as well. But yeah, I guess from once you've got it installed, yeah, I think as you said, Georgina, I think it's a couple of weeks, isn't it, from the claim going through to getting paid?
Yeah, roughly 4 weeks.
4 weeks, is it? Yeah.
Thank you. We are encouraging, if any of you are looking to apply for a grant, we are encouraging that you get those forms in by the end of the year, if possible, just to allow you enough time for everything to be installed and then put in the claim, etc., and receive that. Okay, so if there's no more questions at the moment, is there a link I can use to apply? Yes, there is. I don't know how to go backwards actually, once I've gone forwards. I can put the link to our, so I'm not used to using, Neil, could you put the link from our website into the chat for the page? Sorry, I'm got too many bits open and I can't find what I need. But yeah, we can pop that in the chat. There's also a QR code at the end, and after this meeting I can send out an email to you all with the details of what we've spoken about, including the link on how to submit your interest to the scheme. So also as part of this, if you still would like to learn more about energy efficiency and what you could do for your business, we're running 3 more events, which will be in person in various places across Wiltshire. So I've got details of that on the screen at the moment. There's also a QR code that will take you to the bookings for those. They're all free to attend. Coffee, tea, some breakfast will be included. The next event that we've got is on the 24th of September, so just a few weeks away, and this will be at the Pound Arts Centre in Corsham. So we'll be looking at, why net zero makes business sense. I know that Neil touched on that a little bit earlier, of like why energy efficiency matters, but we'll be kind of looking at the benefits of that more to you. As part of these events, we also benefit from having some beneficiaries of the Target 2030 programme actually in attendance. So they'll be talking through the process, the journey that they went on with us, the sort of the benefits that they've seen, how it's improved things for them. And we'll also have representatives from renewable energy installation companies, so you'll get that kind of more in-depth information about more of the technical side of things. So if you are interested in solar or battery storage, I'm not sure what other things that they do, but they'll be the people to ask. So yeah, I think they'll be good. I think they'll be very informative, and we hope to see you there. If you can't make it, do not worry. But we will be here for if you have any further questions. Okay, so we've come to the end. So there you go. There's a QR code there, which will take you to our web page. At the bottom of the web page is the inquiry form. So if you complete that, that will get sent through to my colleague, and then from there we will get you onboarded. And we've also got our email addresses there, so if you would like to reach out to us, you can do so. Right, if there's no more questions, thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you've found it useful. And yes, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rachel.
Oh, we only 2, I think now.
Yeah, I think a couple people had just left it playing. Oh, I need to stop the recording.